Hey guys, today I'll show you a horror thriller TV series named Teen Wolf, Season 3, Part 1. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The drama takes place in Beacon Hills town where strange events began occurring suddenly. First, a moose killed itself by crashing into a car. Then, all the crows launched suicidal attacks on humans. Overnight, all the cats and dogs in the pet hospital died mysteriously. The town's native werewolves started an investigation. The root cause turned out to be a group of wolves infiltrating the town. It's been 4 months since the last battle with the lizard-like creature. On the night before school starts, Isaac, a new werewolf turned by Derek, is chased by 2 red-eyed alpha wolves. A mysterious chicken girl appears and rescues him. She not only knows Isaac's identity, but also the background of his pursuers. Under the relentless pursuit of the alpha wolves, the chicken girl crashes her car. Isaac, severely injured, looks on as the 2 alpha wolves take off their jackets and strike a strange pose. The next moment, an incredible scene unfolds. The 2 merge into a giant werewolf. Isaac is terrified to wet his pants. Just then, the chicken girl regains consciousness and uses a powerful stun gun to seriously injure the combined werewolf, resolving the crisis. They are then found and taken to the hospital. The chicken girl continually mutters that she must find the alpha werewolf. Scott's mother, Melissa, thinks she means Derek, but the woman shakes her head, correcting that she is looking for Scott. This must be a mistake. Scott is not an alpha wolf. Meanwhile, Scott, accompanied by his best friend, gets 2 circles tattooed on his arm. Surprisingly, Stiles gets queasy at the sight of needles. How lame. Just as they leave the tattoo parlor, Scott's tattoo starts to heal. With that, not only did he endure thousands of needle pricks for nothing, but he also wasted his money. That's why he was supposed to get a refund. Catching up with others, Allison spent her vacation in France. Jackson, after being resurrected, was sent to study in England by his father. Lydia has completely broken up with him. The town is small, and the 4, 2 guys and 2 girls, unexpectedly run into each other tonight. At first, it's a bit awkward, especially since Scott and Allison hadn't been in any hormone touch all summer. Suddenly, a crazed moose charges at them, smashing the front windshield, startling the 2 girls. Scott places his hand on the dying moose and senses its fear. The full moon shines brightly, but the mountaintop is shrouded in darkness. Except for Stiles, the other 3 don't give it much thought. The new school term begins the next morning. Recently, Scott has become fascinated with books about wolves. With his part-time job earnings, he upgraded his ride. Scott is quite satisfied with his Tesla motorcycle until he sees someone else's fantastic Ferrari horse. Allison returns to town feeling lost. After the werewolf and hunter war, her father is her only remaining family. Stiles is absorbed in investigating the moose incident early in the morning, much to the dismay of his sheriff father, who wishes he would focus on his studies. As for Lydia, she has let loose her hormones completely, having taken another boy's virginity this morning. Many new students arrive this term. The school queen bee is on the lookout for new prey. A pair of handsome twins catch her peeping eye. Little does she know they are werewolves, the infamous alpha twins. At the hospital, Isaac's wounds are healing rapidly thanks to Melissa's cover-up, preventing his werewolf identity from being exposed. However, the hospital has scheduled him for surgery, leaving them both worried. The chicken girl, who saved Isaac, has also woken up, looking anxious and desperate to find Scott. A beautiful new teacher named Jennifer joined the school. She was kind and approachable, and her voice was pleasant. However, Scott skipped her first class because his mother couldn't reach him by phone. She had to call the principal to summon Scott to the hospital. At the hospital, a female werewolf disguised as a nurse secretly injected Isaac with anesthesia. When she went looking for the chicken girl, she found that her target had already escaped. Back in the classroom, Stiles was whispering to Lydia when a crow suddenly crashed into the window. Then, the class noticed countless crows flying out of the forest, swarming towards the school in a frenzy. They crashed into the classroom in a suicidal attack, and all of them died. With one strange event after another, it seemed like the town was on the brink of change. Meanwhile, Scott rushed to the hospital and learned from his mother about Isaac's injuries. He quickly took the elevator to the 2nd floor to check on Isaac. Just as the elevator doors were about to close, a blind man stopped them. He was also heading to the 2nd floor. Upon arrival, the blind man asked Scott to help him walk. The now unconscious Isaac was being wheeled into surgery. When the doctors removed the bandages, they were stunned. Isaac had been admitted with severe abdominal injuries, but now not only were there no wounds, there wasn't even a scar. The lead surgeon, feeling tricked, stormed out angrily. Isaac was then wheeled away by another werewolf. These werewolves were becoming increasingly brazen, but it's still unclear why Isaac had attracted so many alpha wolves. After shaking off the blind man and his blind eyes, Scott immediately searched for Isaac. He stumbled upon the werewolf just in time. Scott lunged into the elevator, claws extended, only to realize he was facing an alpha wolf. The alpha wolf gave Scott a thorough beating. Just then, the elevator doors opened, and Derek appeared, executing a flawless surprise attack. Another impressive entrance by Derek. Back in the classroom, Miss Jennifer was still in shock, unaware that the town was full of hidden dangers. Stiles even plucked a feather from her hair. The werewolf hunter Chris arrived soon after, and when questioned by his daughter about the events, his furrowed brow suggested he knew more than he was letting on. The sheriff, aware of Chris's hunter background, approached for answers, but Chris was unwilling to reveal anything, claiming he had retired from hunting. Elsewhere, Scott and Derek brought Isaac back to the old house for treatment. Though Isaac appeared to have healed externally, internal injuries persisted. Such was the terrifying power of alpha wolves. Scott was still in the dark about the alpha wolf pack, and Derek, wanting to keep him out of it, urged him to go home. Scott, recalling something, asked Derek for advice on getting a permanent tattoo. The chicken girl, having escaped the hospital, arrived at the school to ask Allison and Lydia about Scott's whereabouts. Allison was cautious. When the chicken girl noticed the twin werewolves at the end of the hallway, she grabbed the girl's wrists and fled without explaining. The girls were left puzzled, noting the bruises on their wrists. Chris clearly knew why and warned his daughter Allison to stay out of all werewolf matters. Meanwhile, the sheriff consulted the veterinarian about the animal's insanity. To his dismay, the vet reported the same issue. All the cats and dogs in the clinic had killed themselves overnight. The vet was devastated, wondering how he could continue his business. Stiles arrived at the old house to help Scott with his tattoo. Due to their extraordinary healing abilities, werewolves had to endure more pain to get a tattoo, requiring a permanent scar from fire. Scott fainted from the pain. When he woke up, he was very pleased with his tattoo. Unlike the usual triskele symbol, Scott's tattoo was unique. As they prepared to leave, Scott noticed that one side of the door had been painted red. The more Derek tried to hide it, the more curious Scott became. Using his claws, Scott scratched away the paint to reveal the mark Derek had been trying to conceal. Meanwhile, in the locker room, the chicken girl found herself cornered by the alpha wolf pack. With no way out, she decided to fight to the death. It was as if Scott had found a connection between the strange events in town over the past few days and the night he was bitten by an alpha wolf. However, this time the animal's reactions were even more intense and frenzied. Derek finally told him the truth that the alpha wolf pack had arrived. At the same time, the chicken girl held her ground against the alpha wolves for several rounds. Ultimately, she was taken down by a female alpha wolf. The fact that she lasted so long proved her extraordinary identity. It turned out the handsome blind man was Deucalion, the leader of the alpha wolf pack, a king among kings, the strongest alpha wolf. The missing Erica and Boyd had been captured by the alpha wolf pack. Oddly enough, the alpha wolves had been in town for 4 months without attacking Derek, seemingly scheming something. Instead, Derek, Peter, and Isaac had been tracking their whereabouts. When Isaac woke up, he immediately asked about the chicken girl, leaving the 3 men puzzled. Deucalion approached the chicken girl, gently stroking her cheek without a tongue massage. Through their conversation, it was revealed that the alpha wolf pack was hunting the chicken girl because she knew Deucalion's secret. He feared Scott as a potential threat. Deucalion mentioned that someone taught him a clever way to eliminate threats. Let others deal with them for you. This sounded familiar. It was the famous saying of the hunter patriarch Gerard. It seemed Deucalion had crossed paths with the old man. Now we knew his real target in town wasn't Derek, but Scott, highlighting Scott's uniqueness. Though he seemed like an Omega wolf, the lowest rank, he was actually on a path to a more powerful evolution. Deucalion tore open the chicken girl's chicken throat, ending her chicken life before she could emit any chicken noises. Elsewhere, Allison and Lydia discovered that the bruises on their wrists formed a pattern when put together. This clue was the key to finding Erica and Boyd. The scene shifts to the birthday party of a girl named Heather. She's decided that she wants to find a casual hookup at her birthday party to end her virginity. As she puts it, she hopes to be skilled and experienced when she eventually finds true love. The lucky guy she chooses is none other than the school's well-known geek, Stiles. Her friends are stunned by her choice. Feeling lonely, Stiles tries to chat up a random girl but gets ignored. Heather leads Stiles to the wine cellar and throws her heavy body into his hormone let-go arms. Even the most clueless guy would realize he's hit the jackpot. However, Styles, being a newbie, never thought to carry protection, as he never imagined he'd be in such a situation. At Heather's hint, he rushes upstairs to the bathroom to find a condom. While Styles is away, all the wine racks start shaking, bottles fly and shatter. Heather screams in terror, cornered by the window. After a moment of silence, the window suddenly bursts open, and Heather is lifted easily despite being heavy and taken away. Styles rummaged through drawers and finally found a condom, only to discover it was a large size, making him feel insecure. When he returned to the wine cellar, Heather was gone without traces of her smell. The neat cellar indicated that what Heather saw was an illusion. Styles assumed she had changed her mind. Meanwhile, Derek and his team moved to a new base. Since the Alpha Wolves were after Isaac, it meant he had seen or heard something important, though Isaac couldn't remember. Peter, though no longer an alpha, was more skilled with werewolf abilities than his nephew Derek. He used his claws to pierce Isaac's neck, delving into the deepest parts of Isaac's mind. Peter saw a blurry vision and several indistinct figures. As he tried to explore further, it seemed the man noticed and forced Peter out of Isaac's mind. Derek asked what Peter saw. Peter revealed that Isaac had found Boyd and Erica. Though the exact location was unclear, Peter heard a conversation indicating their death would come on the next full moon. Later, Allison and Lydia showed Scott the scratch marks left by Boyd, believing they were clues to finding Boyd and Erica. Derek, however, refused to believe them. Allison, still holding a grudge against Derek for her mother's death, clashed with him. Caught in the middle, Scott was torn. The meeting ended in discord. In a comical turn, during the coach's economics class, Scott dared to answer a question. Styles accidentally revealed the unused condom from the previous night, leaving the class in stunned silence. The coach congratulated him on growing up. Just then, the sheriff arrived, informing Styles that Heather was missing, and he was the last person to see her. On another front, Lydia was eyeing the twin werewolves, but since one was straight and the other gay, her options were limited. The gay one, however, was already involved with the girly boy, Danny. Allison had a sudden idea that the pattern on their wrists might be a logo, prompting her to investigate. To help Isaac regain his memory, the vet suggested an ice bucket therapy, putting Isaac in a state of deep meditation similar to hypnosis. Isaac finally remembered the ordeal, discovering the Alpha Wolves' hideout at the abandoned bank, and the logo matched the pattern on the girl's wrists. Isaac saw Erica's body during his escape. She was already dead like a piece of shit. Derek refused to believe it. Peter had seen Boyd and a woman locked in a vault. If it wasn't Erica, who could it be? Styles speculated that whether the woman was a werewolf or not, being locked together during the full moon would lead to mutual slaughter. Breaking in head-on was the worst plan, so Styles took on the task of devising a rescue plan. The bank's abandonment was due to a robbery case solved by the sheriff. Styles got the case files from his sheriff dad, learning the robbers had dug a tunnel into the vault, which could be easily broken open by a werewolf. On the other side, Allison traced the logo to a bank. To verify her findings, she decided to investigate on her own. During her exploration, she unexpectedly encountered the school therapist, Dr. Morell, who warned her not to ask too many questions and to hide in a nearby storage room. Morell advised her to come out only if she heard the sounds of a fight. Although Allison didn't fully understand, she complied. In the storage room, Allison discovered the body of Erica. Poor Erica had met her end. Peter did not participate in the rescue mission, believing it wasn't worth risking their lives for a beta wolf. Styles wanted to join, but had to wait due to his lack of strength. Styles found it odd that the wolves chose a bank as their hideout instead of an underground cave. Peter was exasperated, explaining that even werewolves need to enjoy life. Styles then wondered why the wolves chose tonight out of all the full moons. Initially, Peter was annoyed by Styles' chatter, but then he realized something important and questioned what the vault's dome was made of. They checked the records and found that the vault was constructed with moonstone. Peter immediately knew it was bad news and told Styles to call Scott and Derek right away. The Alpha Wolves' target wasn't Boyd and Erica, but Scott and Derek. Meanwhile, Derek punched through a wall and, along with Scott, successfully infiltrated the vault, only to find something off with Boyd. At that moment, Styles called to warn them to leave immediately. The moonstone blocked moonlight, meaning the wolves hadn't transformed for 3 months. Starved of moonlight, they became even more bloodthirsty, savage, and insane. Derek recognized the woman's face and incredulously asked if she was Cora, but the woman urged Derek to leave. Derek had known this woman before. Scott then noticed a circle of mountain ash around the vault, realizing it was a trap. The vault door suddenly opened, and moonlight poured in. Morell had arrived, completing the trap. The moonlight drove Boyd and Cora into a frenzy. Although Morell had cut off Scott and Derek's escape route, she had left a contingency plan. Hearing the sounds of the fight, Allison rushed out to help. Derek and Scott, restrained, could only take the beating. It turned out that Cora was Derek's long-lost sister, whom he believed had died. Allison arrived and broke the mountain ash barrier, allowing the two out-of-control wolves to escape. Instead of thanking Allison, Derek blamed her for releasing 2 killing machines. Derek decided it was time to reveal the truth about Allison's mother's past actions, so she wouldn't believe they all owed her something. After learning the truth, Allison felt deeply guilty towards Scott, now confirming that her mother had tried to kill her boyfriend, leading to her own demise. Elsewhere, Lydia suddenly screamed without reason. Oddly, her parents didn't react. She had been relying on medication to sleep, and finding the bottle empty, went out to get more. Strangely, she ended up at a swimming pool. In a trance, Lydia wondered why she was there. She then saw a figure floating in the pool. Terrified, she approached, hoping the figure was not dead. To her relief, she discovered it was just a mannequin. But then she noticed her hands were covered in blood. Following a trail of blood, Lydia found a murdered man. The rogue wolves, Boyd and Cora, roamed the forest in search of prey. A child catching fireflies saved his life. During a camping trip, a sidekick girl suddenly screamed, seeing bugs covering the tent. Her friend saw nothing. The sidekick girl ran away, and a swarm of bugs enveloped her before she vanished. Meanwhile, her friend was targeted by Cora, but was saved when Scott and his team arrived in time to drive Cora away. Lydia informed Stiles, who arrived at the murder scene. He told Scott, and everyone assumed Boyd and Cora were responsible. With lives at stake, Scott sought help from Hunter Chris. Though Chris had retired, he couldn't ignore the tragedy and agreed to help. He taught the werewolves capture techniques, opening a new world for them. Chris then devised a plan to use ultrasonic emitters to herd the rogue wolves to the school and trap them in the boiler room. This marked the first true collaboration between wolves and hunters. However, they miscalculated. Even late at night, the school was occupied by the new teacher, Jennifer. As they set up the emitters, Peter taunted Derek, questioning the efficacy of high-tech gadgets. Peter saw through Deucalion's scheme. He wanted Derek to kill his own pack members as a test to join the Alpha Pack. Peter suggested letting Scott handle it to prove their superiority. After dropping Lydia off at home, Stiles received the news of Heather's death. He rushed to the hospital to examine the body. Stiles noticed that both Heather and the man found dead by the swimming pool had severe head injuries, strangulation marks on their necks, and their throats slit. This ruled out Cora and Boyd as the culprits. Stiles recalled that Heather was a virgin and had seen a purity ring on the murdered man's hand. Suddenly, he made a connection. He urgently asked Melissa if there were any other victims that night. Melissa, finding it hard to believe, confirmed that a sidekick girl from a camping trip had also gone missing, though her fate was still unknown. Her friend, who had been frightened, was being examined at the hospital. Stiles needed to speak with the girl to confirm his suspicions. Meanwhile, the 2 rogue werewolves were lured to the school. Allison used arrows to drive them, her fierce demeanor captivating Isaac. With coordinated efforts, the group managed to trap the 2 wolves in the boiler room. The plan to capture the wolves was a success, and everyone breathed a sigh of relief. Suddenly, Scott sensed 3 heartbeats in the boiler room, not 2. It turned out there was a storage room inside the boiler room, and teacher Jennifer, who had been working late, was trapped inside with the wolves. From the camping girl, Stiles learned that the sidekick girl was also a virgin, confirming his theory. He feared the sidekick girl was likely dead, with her sidekick role ending prematurely. Derek decided to enter the boiler room alone to rescue the teacher. He would either kill the 2 wolves or be killed. Despite being an alpha, Derek's strength was questionable against 2 ravenous wolves. As he entered, he seemed larger and more imposing. The 2 bloodthirsty wolves turned their attention to Jennifer. At the critical moment, Derek intervened, grappling with both wolves. One was his friend, the other his sister. Unwilling to harm them, Derek used his hands to firmly hold them, enduring their violent attacks without faltering. Derek had changed. Once criticized by his uncle for lacking emotion, he now showed a depth of feeling, though he struggled to express it. As the sun began to rise, Derek stood his ground. Scott and Isaac arrived, deeply moved by Derek's actions. They realized they needed to reassess their opinion of their leader. Jennifer, having spent the night hiding in the storage room, didn't know who this bloodied man was, but knew he had saved her life. At the hospital, Stiles shared his findings with Scott. Cora and Boyd were not responsible for the deaths. This meant a deranged serial killer was on the loose in town. Stiles speculated it might be a living sacrifice ritual, and the deaths of the 3 virgins were just the beginning. The scene shifts to a boy named Kyle, bringing his beloved dog to the pet hospital. Unbeknownst to Kyle, his classmate working there part-time was actually a werewolf. This explained why his usually unruly dog was so obedient in Scott's hands. It was the dominance of a werewolf's bloodline. The dog's illness was caused by mistletoe, which is also deadly to werewolves. As soon as Kyle left the pet hospital, his dog ran off in a frenzy. While searching for it, Kyle heard noises from beneath a garbage bin. Bending down to investigate, he was bitten on the finger, but his dog was across the street, so what had bitten him? Driven by curiosity, Kyle bent down again and heard whispers getting closer. His dog started barking furiously as if trying to warn him. Kyle's eyes widened in horror as he was suddenly pulled in. Early in the morning, Derek visited Miss Jennifer just to make sure she was okay. Derek was clearly smitten. In the locker room, Scott and Stiles discussed Kyle's disappearance. Stiles was both terrified and enraged by the serial killer. He worried that Kyle, being a virgin, was kidnapped by the killer, just like Stiles himself, who was also a virgin. Stiles declared he needed to find someone to sleep with that night. Danny, overhearing, offered to help if Stiles couldn't find a girl. Stiles hesitated for a moment and dismissed his bullshit. Danny laughed and said he was joking, but Stiles seemed a bit disappointed. It was clear Stiles had feelings for Danny. During a morning run, Isaac recognized the twin werewolves who had chased him that night. He followed them, only to fall into their trap and get beaten up in an isolated area. Luckily, Scott arrived to intervene. A 2-on-2 fight was about to erupt when they heard a girl scream. They rushed to find Kyle's virgin body, killed in the same gruesome manner as the previous victims. Stiles was convinced it was a human sacrifice, while Isaac blamed the twin werewolves, vowing revenge for them killing the chicken girl who saved him at the cost of her chicken life. Meanwhile, Cora revealed why she returned to town. She wanted to join Derek's pack after hearing her brother had become an alpha. However, she encountered an alpha pack. Before the siblings could catch up, an alpha couple, Ennis and Kaylee, attacked. Cora, being only a beta, was quickly overpowered. Derek fought Kaylee but was easily defeated, even getting impaled by a metal rod. Their leader, Deucalion, then casually walked in, wanting to talk to Derek. In Morel's French class, Allison woke from a nightmare about her mother just as the bell rang. After everyone left, Allison confronted Dr. Morel, questioning each other about their presence at the bank that night. Neither woman backed down, and Dr. Morel, using her authority, punished Allison by making her stay after school. In chemistry class, Scott quietly advised Isaac to stay calm as they both sensed the twin werewolves in the hallway. Furious, Isaac left under the pretense of needing the bathroom. Scott tried to follow but was stopped by the chemistry teacher. In the hallway, Isaac confronted the twins. Despite being outmatched, Isaac advanced. Unexpectedly, one twin started beating the other, who didn't fight back. Isaac was confused but found it somewhat satisfying. The beaten twin then rolled to Isaac's stinky feet, attracting a crowd. Isaac realized too late it was a setup. Danny, furious over his boyfriend's injuries, glared at Isaac, and the chemistry teacher punished him by making him stay after school. Scott knew Isaac was no match for the Alpha twins. Derek thought Deucalion had come to kill him, but Deucalion scoffed, saying he was not like his perverted uncle, and he's here to show him how vast a blind man's vision can be. It seemed that Peter's perversion was infamous. Deucalion validated Peter's suspicion. He wanted Derek to join the Alpha Pack. But as a pledge of allegiance, Derek had to kill a member of his own pack, either Boyd or Isaac. The rest would be eliminated by the pack's instincts. This was the Alpha Pack's rule. The strong should not be burdened by the weak. After school, Scott reminded Isaac not to act impulsively. However, he noticed the straight twin who had been hitting on Lydia. Despite advising others to stay calm, Scott himself was furious. Stiles wanted to find out if Kyle was a virgin, so he took the opportunity to ask Kyle's girlfriend. Knowing the question was sensitive, he subtly inquired if they had slept together. The girl was so upset she punched Stiles, but she still answered Kyle was not a virgin. Stiles' sheriff, Dad, angrily told him to stop meddling as the FBI had formed a task force to assist, but Stiles believed the serial killer had a pattern in selecting victims. There were many students staying after school. The chemistry teacher assigned them tasks in groups. Allison and Isaac were paired to clean the storage room, a secluded place where sparks might fly. Isaac, considering Allison was Scott's ex, wanted to switch groups, but the teacher refused. Kyle's locker was filled with flowers and memorial cards. Stiles came looking for clues and discovered that Boyd knew Kyle. Stiles learned from him that both had attended the training corps. In the dark, narrow storage room, Allison and Isaac reminisced while organizing. During the werewolf hunter battle, Allison had stabbed Isaac over 20 times. Allison explained with a smile that it was a ring dagger, but she still felt sorry. Suddenly, the door closed. Isaac tried to open it, but found something blocking it from the outside. Unsure if it was a prank or a targeted act, Isaac, who had claustrophobia from being locked in a freezer by his father, began to panic and pounded the door. Seized by fear, he turned feral and lunged at Allison. Just in time, Scott arrived and stopped him with a thunderous shout. Isaac calmed down. Scott didn't blame him, knowing it was a deliberate act, likely by the twin werewolves. Scott decided to strike back. Unable to find a pattern, Stiles brainstormed. Ancient people like to do things in threes. Maybe the serial killer, having killed 3 virgins, was moving to the next stage. Kyle had disappeared while treating his dog. Stiles speculated the next victims might be 3 dog owners. Lydia frowned, revealing that she had a dog and she wouldn't abandon it. Meanwhile, Scott and his group executed a revenge plan. Allison and Isaac stole the twins' motorcycle, while Scott played with its parts in class. The twins were immediately enraged. The straight twin took the bait, skipped class, and was falsely accused by Isaac of racing in the hallway. The teacher believed it, though the revenge was mild, it was annoying. Derek hadn't bled to death. Deucalion patiently told his story. It was known that the stronger the individual werewolf, the stronger the pack. When Deucalion went blind, a beta under him tried to replace him. Deucalion had to kill him for survival, which opened a new door. The pack could feed the individual. The power of the beta he killed merged into him, making him stronger and faster. Deucalion followed a path of devouring, killing his pack to strengthen himself. The 4 alpha wolves following him had also taken this path, experiencing its benefits. Alpha wolves could infinitely create beta wolves. Deucalion could endlessly manufacture and consume them to grow stronger. However, now he had joined the alpha pack, suggesting he had reached his limit. Killing ordinary beta wolves no longer yielded significant gains. Deucalion touched Derek's face, remarking on his resemblance to his mother, implying a past connection. He asked Derek to call him uncle, but Derek, preferring death, called Deucalion a mad cow. Deucalion roared like a goose, saying that he's the ultimate alpha wolf at the top of the food chain. Even his companions felt a surge of fear. With his roar, his glasses shattered once again, a frequent and frustrating occurrence that was hard on his eyewear. Afterward, the 3 of them left with an air of superiority. Meanwhile, Lydia found herself in a semi-conscious state during music class, sketching a tree. It wasn't until Danny nudged her that she snapped out of her trance. The music teacher had a rule. If he didn't show up within 15 minutes, class would be canceled. When everyone else had left, Lydia approached the piano. The playback was a recording of the teacher practicing. Suddenly, after a jarring piano note, the recording erupted into a sound like soldiers clashing in battle. On the other side of town, Stiles sought out the vet, hoping his extensive knowledge could confirm his theory. Stiles suspected that the serial killer was a druid, as druids were known for offering living sacrifices to the gods. However, the vet dismissed the idea. He believed someone was merely mimicking the ancient ritual, and the imitation druid enraged him. At that moment, Lydia called Stiles to inform him that the music teacher was missing and there was blood on the piano. Stiles and the vet rushed to the scene. Lydia played the strange recording, which gave the vet an insight. The serial killer's next targets might be doctors, warriors, scholars, representing different strengths. Stiles discovered that the music teacher was a former soldier and that Kyle had been in the officer training corps. This round of murders seemed to target warriors. Stiles feared Boyd was next. Lydia had a flash of insight. There was another person at school with a military background. It's the chemistry teacher who graduated from West Point. As he was grading papers, the sound of battle erupted in the classroom. Elsewhere, Scott and Isaac were intercepted by the twins. Their earlier pranks were just a warm-up. Now it was time for the real fight. The twins stripped off their clothes and merged into their combined werewolf form, a unique advantage of being twins. It was the first time Scott had seen this and he was too stunned to fight, but Isaac was eager. However, the 2 of them were no match for the merged werewolf. Suddenly, Deucalion arrived. The giant wolf shrank back like a scolded child, splitting back into 2. Without a word, Deucalion tapped the twins with the tip of his blind stick, a silent but potent reprimand. When Stiles and others arrived, the chemistry teacher was already gone, leaving his bag in the classroom. They found that the scores on the exams formed a word when pieced together. The vet's face grew grave, realizing it's done by the dark druid, who could channel their ability to harness the forces of nature. Back at the wolf den, Derek coldly ordered Isaac to leave. The young werewolf felt betrayed. When Boyd and Erica left the pack, he had stayed loyal, and now he was being cast out. Only Cora understood her brother's true motive. Derek was trying to protect Isaac. Derek was a true man. With nowhere else to go, Isaac turned to Scott for a shelter. In the forest, the chemistry teacher was tied to a tree. He pleaded with the person behind the tree not to kill him. It turned out he had done many things for the Dark Druid, but now he was abandoned and met his tragic end. The scene shifts to the school organizing an away game for the players. The atmosphere on the school bus was tense. Boyd and Isaac were downcast, and only one of the twin werewolves had come along. Since he was sitting with Danny, it was clear that it was Ethan, the gay twin. Sitting in the back, Scott was lost in thought. The bumpy ride aggravated his abdominal wound. Stiles was very concerned, noticing Scott's abdomen was bleeding profusely. More than his physical injury, Scott was devastated by Derek's death. The scene flashes back to 2 days earlier. Scott didn't want Allison to be targeted by the Alpha Pack, so he visited her, warning that the enemies they faced this time were not hunters she could easily deal with. But Allison was defiant. She had once single-handedly captured Boyd and Erica. The two began to spar. Scott's intention was to show that if she couldn't even defeat him, she stood no chance against the terrifying Alpha Wolves. However, his seriousness only angered Allison. As Scott left, he unexpectedly encountered the demon wolf Deucalion in the elevator. Scott bared his claws, thinking Deucalion was after Allison, but it turned out Deucalion lived there. On reaching the ground floor, Scott informed Derek and the others of Deucalion's residence. They already knew and were planning a decapitation strike. Derek, determined to break free from control, decided to launch a surprise attack on Deucalion the next day. Scott was opposed, questioning why no one thought of a peaceful solution. Peter scoffed at his righteousness. Despite overestimating their abilities, ambushing Deucalion was their only chance. Back in the present, Scott was gravely injured but still had to keep an eye on Boyd and Isaac. The two were like ticking time bombs, constantly looking for trouble with Ethan to avenge Derek. Allison and Lydia chose to drive instead of taking the bus. Initially, Lydia didn't want to come, but Allison didn't want her getting too close to Ethan's straight twin brother. However, Lydia had already gotten close to the twin brother and was quite proactive about it. A traffic jam ahead brought the bus to a halt. Boyd was ready to start trouble. Scott rose to the occasion. He recalled the vet's words before the battle, which told him not to stop them, but to lead them. Under Scott's suppression, Boyd regained his composure. Ethan kept checking his phone, seemingly waiting for a message, which made Scott uneasy. Stiles decided to use Danny, who was unaware of the situation, to gather intel. Initially, Danny refused, but after being bombarded with texts from Stiles, he reluctantly asked Ethan why he was so anxious. Ethan revealed that a relative was gravely ill and might not make it through the night. It's Ennis, one of the Alphas. Morel had taken 3 Alpha Wolves to the vet clinic for help. The vet, unwilling to open the barrier, was threatened by Alpha Kali with Morel's life. The vet, calling her bluff, said she wouldn't do it. Kaylee's tough act was seen through. Morel, who navigated both camps, played a mysterious role. Eventually, she convinced the vet to help, warning that if Ennis died, the Alpha Pack would retaliate against Scott. Scott's condition worsened, his blood nearly black. Unable to treat his wound on the bus, Stiles contacted the 2 girls. Allison suggested stopping at a rest area to bandage Scott. However, the coach refused to stop, responding to Stiles's pleas with childish whistling. Even the usually patient Stiles was fed up. Coincidentally, a classmate with a desperate need for the bathroom provided the perfect excuse. Stiles, with a devilish smile, approached the shy student. The next moment, everyone was rushing out of the bus. Stiles's prank had worked. Scott was taken to the restroom by the 3. His abdominal wound was severely infected. If it was just an alpha wolf scratch, it shouldn't have been this bad. Lydia speculated that psychological trauma was causing the physical ailment, rooted in Derek's death. Scott was consumed with guilt. Lydia suggested stitching the wound, believing that if Scott trusted in his healing ability, it would kickstart his regeneration. With the bus ready to leave at any moment, Stiles and Lydia went outside to stall for time, while Allison stayed to sew the wound. Nervous, her hands shook, and she struggled to thread the needle, haunted by her mother's mocking voice. Scott fell into memories again. To avoid further deaths, he had arranged a meeting with Deucalion. They met in an abandoned building. Concerned for his safety, Isaac insisted on accompanying him. What Scott didn't expect was that Derek had already set up an ambush at the location. Derek knew Scott too well. Scott tried to persuade Derek, but he didn't want to hear any grand principles. Derek was more aware of Deucalion's terror than anyone else, and he believed there was only one solution: to kill Deucalion. Deucalion, however, remained unfazed. Then, his 4 alpha wolves made a dramatic entrance, surrounding Derek and his team. This was the last thing Scott wanted to see. Back in the present, the coach blew the whistle, ordering everyone onto the bus, but Allison and Scott hadn't returned yet. Stiles came up with another plan. He incited Boyd and Isaac to pick a fight with Ethan to delay the bus's departure. Allison successfully stitched Scott's wound, and he woke up, immediately blaming himself, saying that he hadn't been able to stop the great battle, and he felt responsible for Derek's death. During the provocation, the alpha Ethan didn't fight back. Instead, he laughed freely. Isaac was venting his anger, and Ethan was punishing himself. There were no winners in that battle. Neither the coach nor Danny could stop the escalating tension until Scott stepped in, shouting to halt Isaac's rage. Meanwhile, unable to find Derek's body, Peter took his niece Cora to the vet clinic, hoping for some luck. Unexpectedly, the alpha wolves were stationed outside. Thanks to the vet's rescue efforts, Ennis managed to survive. Upon hearing the good news, Deucalion smiled slightly. He bent down, kissed Ennis's cheek, and then placed his clawed hand over his face. The vet sensed something was wrong, but as an outsider, he couldn't intervene and could only watch. Deucalion, the demon wolf, had become the strongest alpha wolf by devouring his kind. Ordinary beta wolves no longer satisfied him. The 4 alpha wolves who followed him were both companions and sustenance. Ennis's death devastated his partner Kaylee, who didn't know it was their leader who had dealt the fatal blow. Peter and Cora, hiding in the shadows, quickly retreated, fearing they'd become scapegoats if discovered. What exactly happened during that great battle? On Derek's side, only Boyd and Cora were left standing. Peter was genuinely struggling. Scott and Isaac, who had come to negotiate peace, had no choice but to help them. Deucalion never intervened directly. His 4 alpha wolves fought Derek's team to a standstill. In truth, only Derek had a slight advantage, as he was on par with his enemies. Scott and the 3 beta wolves, however, were completely outmatched. Scott's abdominal wound was caused by the combined werewolves. An alpha wolf's scratch couldn't heal quickly in a beta wolf. In contrast, a beta wolf's scratch could be easily healed by an alpha wolf. The alpha wolf couple worked seamlessly together, defeating Derek and Boyd. The combined werewolf twins were more than the sum of their parts, leaving Scott and Isaac powerless. Cora had already fallen midway through the battle. With the outcome clear, Deucalion finally spoke. He told Derek that if he killed Boyd, he would spare the others. Taking this step would allow Derek to join the Alpha Pack and embark on a stronger path of devouring, but Derek hesitated, and Kaylee mocked him for disgracing the Alpha Wolves. Deucalion turned his attention to Scott, recognizing his potential. Kaylee, however, was not convinced and suggested letting him unleash his potential. Kaylee forced Derek to choose between his wolf friend and his sister, putting him in a difficult position. Suddenly, the sound of something slicing through the air was heard, followed by a flashbang grenade that forced the combined werewolves back into their original forms. It's Allison who made a powerful entrance. The hunter's flashbangs could temporarily blind werewolves. The situation turned once again, giving Scott a moment to catch his breath and neutralizing the twins and Kaylee. Scott stood up and charged at Ennis. Despite being an alpha wolf, Ennis's pride couldn't tolerate a beta wolf's challenge. The two clashed head-on without any special techniques. This confrontation caught Deucalion's attention. Though Scott was pushed back further, he had withstood an alpha wolf's strike. Scott's potential was emerging, hinting at his rise. But the position of an alpha wolf was like a fixed number of divine thrones. A new alpha wolf's rise always involved stepping over an old alpha wolf's corpse. But Scott broke this rule. He didn't need to seize a legacy. He achieved self-realization and established himself as a wolf king. Scott's alpha power was fleeting, so Derek had to deal with Ennis. The two grappled, with Deucalion still not intervening. Derek and Ennis were evenly matched until Scott, fighting dirty, tore Ennis's calf muscle, causing both of them to fall to the ground below, presumably to their deaths. This was why Scott felt so guilty and believed Derek was dead. This was what had happened in the past 2 days. On the next leg of the journey, Allison and Lydia abandoned their car to stay on the bus with the boys. Scott finally had a chance to thank Allison, grateful that she hadn't listened to him and had insisted on joining the battle to provide crucial support. At the veterinary clinic, seeing Ennis's lifeless body, the vet felt a headache coming on. He blamed Morel for getting involved in this mess. At the school, Jennifer was about to leave for the day when an unexpected guest showed up. It's Derek, severely injured. The scene shifts to the year 1977 when a man, heavily injured, dragged himself to a motel. There was a row of bloody bite marks on his abdomen. Knowing he was doomed, he pulled the trigger just as he was about to transform into a monster. The blood stained the carpet of room 217. Over the next 30 years, this motel became a notorious suicide hotspot. On this day, a team traveling for an out-of-town competition happened to stop here for the night, promising a thrilling and chilling experience. The dilapidated motel stunned everyone. The coach handed out room keys, reminding them to pair up carefully. As everyone searched for their rooms, Lydia stood frozen, feeling a sense of dread. She bluntly stated her dislike for the place. Allison shrugged it off, suggesting they just endure it for one night. Scott shared a room with Stiles. They discussed the druid-inspired serial killer. Stiles had 4 suspects. First was the missing chemistry teacher, whose fate remained a mystery. Then there were Cora and the vet. Stiles speculated wildly about the vet, disliking his style. The last suspect was a surprise, Lydia. Stiles worried she hadn't fully recovered and might commit crimes in a trance. Until the serial killer was caught, the 2 boys felt uneasy. Meanwhile, Chris arrived at the site of the werewolf battle. From the scratches and bloodstains, he reconstructed the fight in his mind, thanks to his experience. With his daughter now involved, Chris couldn't stand by idly anymore. Back at the motel, while freshening up, Scott noticed a red glow in his eyes, feeling disbelief. Stiles went out to buy snacks and ran into Boyd, who looked dazed and numb. The vending machine jammed, and Boyd shattered the glass to retrieve the stuck food. Stiles stood there, stunned, then sneakily grabbed 3 snack packs. Boyd wasn't the only one acting strangely. Scott approached Allison while she was showering, speaking flirtatiously and wearing a wicked smile. Allison was at a loss, calling out his name. Scott seemed to snap out of a trance, leaving awkwardly unsure of what had just happened. This motel was definitely off. Lydia went to the front desk and noticed a set of numbers. The elderly owner explained it represented the number of suicides since the motel opened, 198 and counting. Chris, worried about his daughter, called Allison. Learning the motel's name and location, he felt a strange sense of unease and decided to pick her up, but Allison refused. The severely injured Derek, supported by Jennifer, was brought to the hideout. Peter and Cora were absent. Jennifer was terrified, seeing Derek on the brink of death, unable to do anything but sob against his hairy chest. Lydia told Allison about the motel's eerie history. More baffling than the 198 suicides was why the owner would frame and display it, seemingly proud. As Lydia ranted, she suddenly heard a conversation from the next room, a couple planning a double suicide, followed by 2 gunshots. Lydia covered her mouth in shock, but Allison heard nothing. They rushed to room 216, finding it under renovation with no one staying there. Lydia noticed strange patterns on the wooden boards, resembling 2 people screaming in agony. It was incredibly eerie. While getting ice, Boyd suddenly heard Erica's voice, asking him why he left her. Boyd froze in place, nervously pushing aside the ice, only to find Erica's body. He was terrified. This motel was shrouded in ominous vibes. Everyone staying there was mentally affected. The 2 women decided to investigate. They went to the front desk but couldn't find the old lady owner. However, they noticed the suicide count had changed to 201. It was just 198 earlier, which suggested that 3 more people might have ended their lives, or 3 people were about to. Isaac, who was fast asleep like a pig, was suddenly awakened by a clanging noise. It sounded like someone was repairing an appliance above him. He could clearly hear his deceased father's voice, reprimanding his younger self. His abusive father was his inner demon. Isaac gradually fell into despair, leaping onto the bed and burying his head in the pillow, no longer resembling a werewolf. The next moment, he found himself inside a refrigerator. Scott received a call from his mother, who seemed to be crying. His heart skipped a beat as he anxiously asked what was wrong. His mother told him to look out the window. He saw Deucalion holding his mother hostage. Deucalion said that Scott was now an alpha wolf, but Scott insisted he wasn't, believing Derek was still alive. Deucalion claimed Derek was dead, which was why he had come for Scott. In the next moment, he killed Scott's mother. As Scott was overwhelmed with grief, he heard Stiles calling him from behind. It was like waking from a dream. He looked out the window again to find no one there. The hallucination had been too real. The puzzled Stiles wondered why everyone was acting so strangely. Suddenly, he received a text from Lydia asking him to meet her alone for a hormone yoga session. Seeing Scott in a daze, Stiles left quietly. While sparring with Danny, Ethan noticed the scars on Danny's chest and learned he had a congenital cartilage deformity requiring implants. Ethan considered turning Danny into a gay werewolf and jokingly asked if Danny would want his defect cured. Danny, however, was content, feeling like a survivor. As the two became intimate again, Ethan's spine split suddenly, and in panic, he hid in the bathroom, discovering a human face emerging on his abdomen, as if someone was trapped inside. Terrified, he abandoned their intimate but smelly moment. Allison and the other two discussed the strange behavior of Boyd and Scott. Lydia found a Bible in the cabinet, with newspapers reporting suicides in room 217. They speculated that every room might have a Bible with similar clippings. The owner had a morbid sense of humor. They decided to check the adjacent room, but found room 216 locked, with the sound of a chainsaw coming from inside. They broke in to find Ethan holding a saw, about to cut open his stomach. Stiles rushed to stop him, and Lydia unplugged the power just in time, saving Stiles from being harmed. Ethan, still desperate, was burned by the stove during the struggle, snapping him back to reality. He fled in terror, ungrateful for their help. Allison went to check on Scott. After she left, Stiles warily eyed Lydia, recalling a similar incident at her birthday party when she had drugged everyone with wolfsbane. Meanwhile, Boyd sat by the bed, listening to Erica's voice on the radio, unable to turn it off. Guilt-ridden, he broke down, filling the bathtub and sinking into it with a safe, trying to drown himself. At the same time, Lydia sensed something. She heard a baby crying, a mother about to drown her child, a tragic event that had once occurred in the motel, like a mirage from the river of time. Lydia knew this foreshadowed an impending tragedy. Her abilities remained a mystery, but she was starting to uncover them. Soon after, Stiles and Lydia found Boyd drowning. The drain was beneath him and the safe was too heavy. They were at a loss. Stiles recalled Ethan waking up from a burn and suggested using heat, but Boyd was underwater. Lydia remembered that their school bus had flares that could burn underwater. After Stiles retrieved the flare, Lydia heard crying from under the bed, finding Isaac curled up there. They used the flare to save Boyd from the water and then freed Isaac from under the bed. On the other side, after Derek woke up, he bluntly advised Jennifer to leave, confessing that everyone who got too close to him ended up getting hurt. But Jennifer slowly pressed her lips against Derek's. It seemed Derek was having a stroke of luck in love. Meanwhile, Scott was the most troublesome of the four werewolves. He was drenched in gasoline, ready to set himself on fire, preventing his companions from getting close, let alone rescuing him. Despite his girlfriend's pleas, he remained unmoved, tightly gripping a Molotov cocktail. Haunting whispers filled his mind, urging him to ignite himself. Allison stepped forward, trying to dissuade him, but Scott was despondent, wanting to die to appease Derek's spirit. Ultimately, he couldn't forgive himself for causing Derek's death, unaware that Derek was currently enjoying himself somewhere else. Someone was trying to die out of guilt for him, but Scott didn't want to see anyone else die because of him. He thought this was the best solution. Allison's love couldn't sway him. At this moment, Stiles intervened, shouting that this wasn't his true intention and that someone was controlling his mind. As Derek and Jennifer enjoyed their hormone yoga time together, all of Derek's wounds healed. Meanwhile, Scott was stuck in a downward spiral, believing every tragedy stemmed from that night he was bitten by a werewolf. He was about to ignite himself when Stiles stepped forward, proving their bond through actions. Stiles risked his life, using genuine emotion to affect Scott. This was a brotherhood that shared life and death. Stiles seized the Molotov cocktail from Scott and threw it aside, but a gust of evil wind blew it into the gasoline. Lydia was the first to notice, crying out as she threw her heavy body at Scott and Stiles. Lydia looked back and saw a shadowy figure in the flames, the sinister face of the black-cloaked shrimp, mimicking a druid performing dark sacrifices. This night was ordinary for most people, but dangerous for Scott and his friends, causing them to avoid returning to the motel and instead spend the night on the school bus. The next morning, the coach announced the game was canceled and they had to return. Ethan revealed that Derek was not dead, because when they rescued Ennis, Derek had already disappeared. Scott, hearing this, was invigorated, but Ethan stated that Derek killed one of the alphas, which means there are only two outcomes. He joins the alpha wolf pack or eliminates his own. When the coach got on the bus, Lydia noticed purple powder on his clothes, specifically where his whistle was. She quickly checked and found wolfsbane powder inside the whistle. Every time the coach blew the whistle, he unknowingly poisoned the four werewolves, allowing the dark druid to disrupt their minds. Unexpectedly, the hunter patriarch Gerard was still alive, though his body was decaying, with diabetic blood constantly oozing from his mouth and nose. Chris only wanted to ask him one thing. In 1977, his uncle killed himself in room 217 of that motel, the man seen at the beginning of this episode. Chris wanted to know which alpha wolf bit him. Gerard said it was Deucalion. The episode ended here, with the horrifying night at the suicide motel being a plot orchestrated by the Dark Druid. The scene shifts to the hospital receiving a batch of patients from a 10-car pileup, but the emergency doctors mysteriously vanished, leaving only city doctors to provide support. A young boy, hearing a woman's cries, placed his hand over hers, and a miraculous scene unfolded. The woman's pain transferred to the boy. The boy, a werewolf, had the ultimate healing ability to absorb others' suffering. Meanwhile, doctors rushing from the city encountered bizarre events, with butterflies invading their cars. Initially seen as romantic, the butterflies soon overwhelmed the doctors, even entering their mouths. In horror, the doctor saw a decayed, ghostly face in the rearview mirror, revealing that the Dark Druid was at work again. Danny, struggling to breathe, was brought to the hospital by his werewolf boyfriend, Ethan. Scott attended to Danny, discovering mistletoe in his vomit, revealing someone had been sabotaging him. Although the primary doctor was absent, Melissa, with her years of experience, managed to stabilize Danny with a syringe. Ethan expressed his gratitude but owed Scott another favor. As Scott prepared to leave, Ethan declared he would protect Danny from the chaos, but he couldn't guarantee Lydia's safety. She was too important. At that moment, they spotted a car approaching in a serpentine motion, presumably from the city, but it was empty. They found a butterfly inside, and with 2 doctors already missing tonight, Stiles suspected the Dark Druid was initiating a new sacrifice, this time targeting doctors. The sheriff received news that one doctor's body had been found, with onlookers including Deucalion and Chris. Elsewhere, Derek had been struggling recently, facing wrongful blame and death threats from Kaylee, who lost her partner. As Melissa was considered semi-medical, Scott and Isaac stayed by her side to ensure she wasn't the next victim. In class, as Scott and Isaac worried about the next possible victim, Scott received a call from the vet, who was disheartened by the revelation that even veterinarians were being targeted. The vet had been kidnapped by the time Scott arrived at the pet hospital, and the sheriff soon followed. They intended to reveal everything, but Dr. Morell arrived and guided them to find someone who could insight into supernatural phenomena. They both thought of Lydia. Meanwhile, Boyd and Isaac went to help. Though Derek scolded them to return to school, they were prepared to set a trap. Lydia was in a passionate moment with the straight twin wolf when a fire alarm interrupted them. After the twin wolf left, Cora stopped Lydia, revealing she was behind the fire alarm. She warned Lydia to end her relationship with the twin wolf for Derek's sake. Lydia, unfazed by this, argued that her ex was a murderous lizard creature, so dating an alpha wolf was no big deal. As Cora prepared to get physical, Stiles intervened, reminding Cora of his and Derek's connections. Using his enhanced hearing, Scott followed rhythmic knocking to the music room, where he found the demon wolf, Deucalion, who claimed he could help find the vet but wanted to play a game, leading Scott to suspect him as the kidnapper. Stiles tried to activate Lydia's powers by playing with a Ouija board with 2 girls. After posing a question, the 2 anxiously looked at Lydia, only to find her daydreaming. The Ouija board session failed. Stiles then handed Lydia the key to the vet's clinic, placing it in her palm, and asked her to sense the vet's location. Lydia only complained that the key was too cold, and this psychic reading attempt also failed. Triggering Lydia's abilities seemed near impossible. Deucalion proposed a game. If Scott could snatch his blind cane, he would reveal the vet's exact location. Unfortunately, Scott jumped around like a monkey but could never touch the cane, let alone take it. After several rounds, Deucalion revealed the arrowhead on the cane. Scott failed to grab it and was instead stabbed in the chest. Deucalion told him that he wasn't the one who kidnapped the vet. As the demon wolf, he considered himself a grim reaper and wouldn't sacrifice living beings to prey to the gods. He then revealed that someone would die tonight since Kaylee was going to seek revenge on Derek. Scott was forced to choose between saving the vet or Derek. Deucalion smiled and said he had already given him the clue, referring to the wound on Scott's chest. Stiles came up with the automatic writing, where the writer produces content unconsciously. Lydia drew a tree, which frustrated Stiles. He had tried every form of psychic communication with Lydia, but all failed. However, this wasn't the first time Lydia had drawn a tree, perhaps hinting at something significant. Lydia felt dejected, insisting she wasn't a medium. Just then, Scott arrived, having deciphered the wound on his chest. The previous night, Danny had survived with a similar wound, indicating mistletoe, a tool of Dark Druid, was involved. Since Danny wasn't a doctor, Dark Druid must have had another reason for targeting him. The four decided to head to the hospital, but then Allison texted, saying she had found some clues, so they split into two groups. At the hospital, the body of a second doctor was found. Both victims had died from asphyxiation without any marks on their necks. Melissa deduced that the victims had been hung up, forcing them to lift themselves to breathe until they exhausted their strength and suffocated. The floor was flooded, with live wires thrown into the water, creating an electric barrier deadly to werewolves. Although the enemy couldn't get in, movement was nearly impossible for those inside. Scott reached Allison's house, where she showed him a map belonging to her father. At first glance, it seemed ordinary, but under the light, 12 marked locations appeared, 6 of which matched the sites of previous sacrifices. Scott was shocked, realizing Chris might have discovered a pattern. Among the remaining 6 locations, one was likely where the vet would be sacrificed. Stiles sneaked into Danny's hospital room, feeling guilty as Danny slept peacefully. He found Danny's project on geomagnetic currents and was convinced Danny had discovered something significant. Derek and his team spent hours setting up an electric trap, only for the enemy to cut the main power switch, rendering it useless. Kaylee, along with the twins, arrived seeking revenge, holding Jennifer hostage to force Derek into a one-on-one fight. Scott and his group examined Danny's project and found annotations from the chemistry teacher, who had dismissed it as pseudoscience, urging Danny to choose another topic. They speculated the teacher's sacrifice might be connected to this. Danny had a map identical to Chris's, marking all geomagnetic currents. Comparing the two maps, they realized all the sacrifice sites were on geomagnetic lines. The locations of the two abducted doctors fell on one such line, and the vet's location was between these 2 points. Combining this with Chris's marked points, they concluded that the abandoned vault was the place to look. Meanwhile, the vet was on the brink of suffocation, unable to lift himself any longer. The four prepared to set out, but received a text from Boyd. Their trap had been easily dismantled, and they urgently needed backup. Just as Deucalion had said, Scott could only save one, the vet or Derek. Scott decided to rescue the vet while the other 3 went to support Derek. He was determined to save both. Kaylee was overpowering Derek despite his initial resistance. Meanwhile, Scott rushed to the vault and found the vet barely alive. He charged forward but was stopped by a barrier. The vet was surrounded by a circle of rowan ash. Scott pushed forward. The closer he got, the stronger the resistance. Using all his strength, his roar awakened the vet. The vet witnessed a miracle as Scott's yellow eyes turned red, unlocking his potential. Though Scott was repelled by the barrier, a smile appeared on the vet's face. Scott was determined not to let his mentor and friend die. At the critical moment, the sheriff arrived and shot the rope, freeing the vet. The battle with the Alpha Wolves was nearing its end. Derek was no match for Kaylee. Suddenly, Isaac received a text. Stiles, Lydia, and Cora were on their way to restore the power, but before he could warn them, the pool turned into an electrified trap, momentarily immobilizing Boyd. The Alpha twins seized Derek, but Kaylee didn't deliver a fatal blow. Instead, she lifted Boyd and forced Derek to kill him. Kaylee didn't seek revenge. She wanted to recruit Derek, promising to return next full moon. Both the vet and Derek were saved, but no one expected Boyd to be the one to die that night. Derek, ashamed, tried to stop Boyd's bleeding. Using his last breath, Boyd asked what happened during the eclipse. These were the final words of Erica before she died, and now they were his. He had never overcome that moment of fear. Derek, overwhelmed, knelt beside him. The other 3 arrived, with Cora holding Boyd's body in tears. Elsewhere, Chris confronted his father Gerard, demanding answers about that person, referring to either Deucalion or the Dark Druid. Gerard remained silent, prompting Chris to leave in anger. Shortly after, Allison arrived, raising the possibility of Gerard trying to control her again. The sheriff found the vault by recognizing a symbol similar to the clinic's Celtic mark. After calling for an ambulance, the vet excitedly told Scott about his red eyes, unable to hide his excitement. Scott was a rare prodigy, a beta wolf turning into an alpha without stealing or seizing power, driven by inner strength. The vet had always believed Scott was destined for greatness, which is why he mentored him so diligently. Scott was in a daze for a while, and the vet realized Deucalion's true target wasn't Derek, but Scott. The scene flashes back to a young Derek on the run, trying to escape his pursuers. A group of hunters is closing in on him. In his frantic flight, he collides with another werewolf. The man recognizes him as a member of the Hale family. Suddenly, with a sharp whoosh, an arrow pierces the man's throat. This is the fate of werewolves hunted by the relentless trackers. The young Derek stands frozen in shock. In a split second, another arrow is launched but is intercepted by Derek's uncle Peter. The uncle and nephew manage to escape into an underground tree hollow, evading the hunters. However, the events of tonight are just the spark that will ignite a storm of blood and chaos. Derek's mother is the supreme leader of the werewolf world. This episode will reveal Derek's hidden past and the rise of the demon wolf Deucalion. Since the battle with the alpha wolves, Derek has been missing, overcome with guilt. Only Stiles is worried about him. He seeks out Cora to learn about Derek's past, but Cora knows little about her brother. They turn to their uncle Peter for answers. Peter summarizes Derek by saying he used to be like Scott. From Peter, Stiles learns that Derek was completely changed by a past romance. He went from having a pure heart to becoming a wrathful brute. Before becoming an alpha, Derek's eyes were blue, a change that was also tied to that past relationship. Stiles had assumed the blue eyes were genetic, but there was more to the story. Meanwhile, Allison brings Scott to visit her grandfather, Gerard. This is no family reunion. Scott's reason for visiting is a deal Gerard proposed. If Scott can take away his pain, Gerard will reveal everything he knows, including some long-buried secrets. After transferring the pain, Gerard doesn't rush to tell his tales. Instead, he asks about the Dark Druid. When the vet was rescued previously, the police found a fourth doctor who had been sacrificed. It was as if the Dark Druid had foreseen the vet's survival. The old man then starts sowing discord, suggesting that the vet's near sacrifice was a self-inflicted ruse. But Scott knows the vet's true nature and calls out Gerard's deceit. In the previous season, Gerard failed to turn into a werewolf due to Scott's poisoning. Although he continually exudes black blood from his mouth and nose, the cancer within him has vanished, making him a medical anomaly. Scott asks how to defeat Deucalion. The old man shakes his head, saying it's impossible since he's tried. Allison knows her grandfather too well and urges Scott to leave immediately. Seeing their determination, Gerard reveals that although Deucalion is blind, he is not completely sightless. Back in school, Derek had a crush on a girl named Paige. Like many young people, he would do things to annoy her, but it was just his way of showing interest. Eventually, Derek's persistence won Paige over, and they often met secretly at an abandoned distillery outside of town. Sensing someone approaching, Derek and Paige quickly leave. Not long after, the werewolf trio, Deucalion, Kaylee, and Ennis, reconvenes. Back then, each of them was still a leader of their respective packs. The werewolf, who was shot through the throat by the hunter, was one of Ennis's men. Ennis, furious, proposes revenge against the hunters, but the werewolves aren't a united front. Kaylee mocks Ennis, saying his men's death is not her concern. Deucalion, however, suggests that hunters don't kill werewolves without cause, as Ennis's man had killed someone first. Meanwhile, Gerard is also recounting that night's events, knowing even more than Peter. The reason the three alpha wolves gathered was due to an exceptionally powerful alpha wolf in town, one of the few who could shapeshift. They sought her advice and guidance. Amidst their dispute, a howl silences them all, and a giant red-eyed wolf appears. From Deucalion's gaze, it's clear he admires her. The wolf transforms into a naked woman who is actually Derek's mother. She agrees with Deucalion, stating that revenge only breeds more vengeance. However, Ennis is stubborn, carving a swirling pattern into a metal sheet with his claws, demonstrating his resolve for revenge. Flashback ends there, and Peter explains to Stiles that losing a pack member is like losing a limb, and Ennis couldn't even find his men's body, fueling his rage. Ennis wreaked havoc in the hospital, demanding the body. At the time, Stiles' father was the deputy sheriff. Both Stiles and his father are curious about how this ties to Derek. Peter claims it's all connected, not just a single moment, but a series of events. Learning about Ennis's lost pack member, Derek saw an opportunity. Afraid of losing Paige, he becomes consumed with worry, as they belong to different worlds. One day, the roguish Peter sneaks into the school, mocking Derek's infatuation. Derek threatens to call security to get rid of his uncle. Peter, however, insists that Derek and Paige are a match made in heaven and suggests Derek turn Paige into a werewolf. Coincidentally, there's a vacancy in Ennis's pack. This way, Derek wouldn't have to worry about his werewolf identity, and they could be together forever. Initially, Derek refuses, but Peter persistently convinces him. Only an alpha wolf can transform someone into a werewolf, but Derek's mother would never do it. With the three alphas not staying long in town, Derek decides to take the chance. Gerard's story reaches the part about the tree hollow. He and his son discover a Celtic five-fold knot carved into the roots with sacrificial bloodstains. This signifies a druid sanctuary, a sacred meeting place chosen for its large, ancient trees. Gerard reveals to them that the vet is a druid. The older generations of werewolves had close ties with druids, referring to them as emissaries and advisors. Meanwhile, Peter is also explaining druids to Styles, noting that only alpha wolves are privy to druids' true identities. The vet is an advisor to Derek's family, while his sister serves as Deucalion's professional advisor. This explains why Morel often appears in enemy camps. Revisiting the past, Deucalion and Derek's mother approached the vet to discuss a truce with the hunters. At that time, Gerard was notorious, at the peak of his power, and his gruesome human dissection skills struck fear into the hearts of werewolves. Even Derek's mother was reluctant to engage with him. Deucalion, however, scoffed, asking if they had so little faith in humanity. He believed that even Gerard would consider the lives of his men and that a truce was the best outcome. The vet then shared a fable about a scorpion and a frog. The scorpion stung the frog midway across the river, despite promising not to, resulting in both their deaths. It was simply in the scorpion's nature. Deucalion's trust in human nature was not the mistake. The mistake was trusting a devil in human form. Despite warnings, Deucalion insisted on giving it a try. At school in the evening, Paige stayed late as usual for a rendezvous, but instead encountered a red-eyed monster. It's Ennis, who had been sent by Peter to give Paige a gift. Meanwhile, Derek anxiously waited in the locker room, every second in agony. Cora interrupts the story, curious why Ennis agreed to help. Peter explains that by aiding Derek, Ennis hoped to curry favor with Derek's mother, whom everyone wanted to befriend at that time. Hearing cries from the hallway, Derek couldn't sit still. He rushed out to stop Ennis, with Peter watching from the shadows. Although Ennis wouldn't harm Derek, he pinned him to the ground, forcing him to watch his beloved Paige deteriorate. This was more painful than death. Peter might have meant well, but ended up causing harm. Meanwhile, Gerard recalls his past with Deucalion, expressing no surprise upon receiving the invitation. He always believed it was a werewolf ploy. Scott questions how he could know he wasn't sincerely seeking peace. Gerard responds with the same fable about the scorpion and the frog. To the vet, Gerard was the scorpion, while Gerard viewed the werewolves as the scorpions. The negotiation was doomed from the start. Both parties in the meeting were significant figures, the alpha wolf leader and the hunter's patriarch. Gerard marvels at the choice of the distillery as the meeting place, using the distillation process as a metaphor for the separation of werewolves and hunters. Deucalion used the same metaphor to express his intent for reconciliation, but Gerard released toxic gas from the still, having already taken the antidote himself. This proved he was the true scorpion. However, Gerard twisted the facts in his retelling, claiming he was ambushed and attacked, a lie comparable to Peter's deception. The reality was that Gerard had first slaughtered his own men, those who supported the truce, with a wolfsbane club, calmly collecting heads. Deucalion's worldview shattered, protesting that those were his own people, but Gerard coldly replied because they supported the truce. Deucalion had underestimated the darkness of human nature. Desperately, he crawled towards the exit. Back to the memories, Peter feels a pang of guilt and sadness, having caused a young girl's demise and shattered a pure heart. In the magical tree stump called Nemeton, Paige lies in Derek's arms, her wound not healing, indicating she hadn't transformed. In Gerard's story, only Deucalion managed to escape, but he was weak and vulnerable, like a lamb to the slaughter. Gerard looked down at him with a benevolent smile. Deucalion, filled with frustration, said that he foresaw peace. It wasn't supposed to be this way. Gerard sneered, saying he didn't foresee far enough. He then took out 2 arrows and stabbed them into Deucalion's eyes. It was Gerard who had caused Deucalion's blindness. Despite Deucalion's efforts to pursue peace, he had encountered a demon in human form. From that moment, the world gained another demon, the demon wolf, Deucalion. Derek absorbed Paige's pain, but Paige knew she was dying. She asked Derek to end her suffering, the only thing he could do. With his golden eyes glowing, young Derek ended his beloved's life with his wolf claws. After losing his love, Derek's golden eyes turned to a steely blue. Gerard didn't kill Deucalion outright. As a rival, he understood the unspoken rules among werewolves. A blind alpha wolf would only serve as a stepping stone for a new leader. Deucalion was taken to the vet for treatment. While his eyeballs could heal, his vision was gone. He let out a hysterical roar, the darkness of human nature hurting more than his blindness. After the vet and Derek's mother left, Deucalion's trusted aide attempted to seize the alpha power. Deception and betrayal overwhelmed Deucalion that day. Enraged, he suddenly realized that in his human form he had gained the wolf's sight. After brutally killing his man, a new path opened for him to strengthen himself by devouring his own kind. Because of that, Gerard had created a monster. Allison suggested they might use this against him. Scott agreed, having learned a lot from the encounter. As they prepared to leave, Gerard demanded another reward. Scott reluctantly helped him share the pain. The old man suddenly expressed regret, but Scott coldly called him out, saying he had been lying all night. Werewolves can hear heartbeats to detect lies. He warned him if his lies caused harm, he wouldn't just take away his pain. Derek's love story left Stiles feeling sad but also doubtful, as Peter's first-person narrative might be biased or embellished. Peter and Gerard, both master manipulators, would have a hard time deceiving the younger generation. The woman found her son Derek in the sacred Nematon, his once radiant golden eyes now a cold blue. Back to the present, the missing Derek had been hiding in the distillery from years ago. The spiral, symbolizing revenge, was now his deepest desire. The scene shifts to a female officer receiving a report and venturing alone to investigate the school. Her walkie-talkie played the sound of a fierce battle, and a body was being dragged away at the end of the hallway, its upper half obscured from view. The school was shrouded in an eerie atmosphere. With trepidation, she entered the bathroom only to find her own lifeless body. Terror, helplessness, and confusion overwhelmed her as she gasped for breath. Suddenly, she was strangled from behind by a ghastly, contorted face. It's the fallen Dark Druid. A new cycle of live sacrifices was about to begin. Meanwhile, Scott and his three friends gathered at the school because Lydia, in a trance-like state, had been mysteriously drawn there. Her abilities were enigmatic, and this time, she wisely brought the others along to investigate. As expected, they found the dead officer at the school memorial. The town had been plagued by a series of incidents, and a concert was scheduled at the school that evening to mourn the victims. Because Allison had skipped class that morning, Scott asked Isaac to check on her, a perfect excuse to create an opportunity for them. In Jennifer's class, Lydia began drawing trees again. This particular tree might be connected to the Druid's sacred grove. Jennifer caught a glimpse of the drawing and looked uneasy, but continued discussing the origins of idioms. When she mentioned certain industry-specific terms, Scott got an idea. Perhaps the Dark Druid had once been a guardian of the werewolves. He suggested they talk to Ethan, one of the werewolf twins. Stiles, however, worriedly pointed out that seeing Ethan meant getting past his twin brother. At that moment, the straight twin was reprimanding Ethan and Danny, telling them to stop their hormone dealings. He considered Scott a threat, but Ethan, having been saved by Scott several times, knew he was a good person and felt the threat was over. The twin werewolves were inseparable, so how to distract the straight one? Scott and Stiles both glanced at Lydia. Maybe she could use her charm. Since Boyd's death, Lydia had been ignoring the straight twin, so he was shocked by her sudden attention. But the straight twin had little choice. In the Alpha Pack, hierarchy was crucial, and the twins were at the bottom. Just then, someone scratched a spiral symbol on the doors and windows, suggesting that it might be Derek seeking revenge. Meanwhile, Scott and Stiles seized the chance to talk to Ethan. Though conflicted, Ethan said, even though he saved him many times, they were still on opposing sides. Stiles was annoyed by his ungrateful words. He brandished a rowan branch dipped in wolfsbane and mistletoe. Stiles' confidence had grown. He wasn't afraid to challenge even an alpha wolf. Scott, however, appealed to Ethan's emotions and logic. They were playing good cop, bad cop, and Ethan finally relented. Ethan explained that he and his twin brother owed Deucalion a lot. Originally, the twins were Omega wolves, with no status, forced to eat scraps. Their original alpha was ruthless, but Deucalion saw potential in the twins and taught them to fight back. They defeated their own pack and claimed the alpha's power, rising to prominence. Elsewhere, it wasn't Derek who came for revenge, it was his sister, Cora. In a flash, she clawed Ethan's twin brother's chest. Scott was curious about the druids that served the wolf packs. Normally, Ennis, Kaylee, and the twins would each have their own druid. Ethan explained sadly that, except for Deucalion's druid, the others were dead. The strange thing was, exactly 3 guardians had died. Suddenly, Ethan felt a sharp pain in his chest, sensing his twin was in trouble. Although Cora slashed the twin's furry chest, that was the extent of her attack. The straight twin retaliated and seriously injured her. Ignoring her pleas, he was determined to kill the beta wolf who dared challenge him. Fortunately, Scott and the others arrived just in time. With Ethan's urging, his twin brother finally relented. On the other side, because Chris had been acting mysteriously lately, his daughter Allison began to suspect that he might be the Dark Druid. He was very familiar with everything about the Druids and knew the coordinates for the sacrifices. The two of them studied the map together. Isaac stepped back a few paces and noticed that the pattern on the desk was obscured by the map. When Allison moved the map, she discovered that the pattern on the desk was the Druid's five-fold knot. Each knot corresponded to a sacrificial group. The four outer knots were for virgins, warriors, doctors, and scholars, while the central knot was for guardians. The two exchanged a look, growing more convinced that Chris was the Dark Druid. Cora was very weak. Instead of being grateful, she blamed the three of them for doing nothing for Boyd's death. Cora believed there was no perfect solution in this world. Only slaughter could stop more slaughter. Meanwhile, Derek returned and sought out Jennifer. She jumped into his arms, enjoying a brief moment of tenderness before the school bell rang. Allison told Stiles about the five-fold knot. Combining this with the murder of the policewoman the previous night, she believed the new sacrificial targets were the police, who are society's protectors. Stiles decided to reveal everything to his sheriff father. On the other side, Scott approached Morel, suspecting her to be the Dark Druid since the other three Druids were dead. Morel's heartbeat remained steady. She wasn't lying. Morel told Scott that Deucalion always wanted to find a true alpha for his pack, and that these sacrificial episodes wouldn't deter him. Deucalion saw Scott as both a potential recruit and a threat, so Scott either had to willingly join his pack or be forced to kill, destroying his chance of becoming a true alpha. Scott was confident he wouldn't be controlled, but Morel pointed out that he had already fallen into Deucalion's trap. Deucalion had the upper hand. Scott, troubled, realized his opponent was far more formidable than he had imagined. In the classroom, the history teacher was preparing lessons on the blackboard. When he turned back, he was shocked to find that the topic had turned into a pattern, the five-fold knot. Stunned, he dropped his chalk, which rolled slowly to Lydia's feet. Lydia, as if sleepwalking, walked straight to the blackboard and marked one of the knots with an alpha symbol. Then she screamed, attracting everyone's attention. Lydia was adamant that the history teacher had disappeared, but the other teachers didn't believe her. First, a policewoman, then a teacher. The pattern was confusing to Scott. Stiles took Cora to his sheriff father, revealing everything about the Dark Druid and the werewolf hunter. This was a radical shift in perception, especially since the shapeshifters Stiles mentioned were people the sheriff knew. As expected, the sheriff didn't believe his son's bullshit. Anticipating this, Stiles brought Cora along. If he could prove the existence of werewolves, it would validate everything else. Just as Stiles was about to ask Cora to transform, she fainted, failing at the crucial moment. Allison received news that the history teacher had disappeared. Coincidentally, her father, Chris, was also missing. She couldn't help but connect the two. Determined to stop her father, she studied the sacrificial map with Isaac and discovered a new mark. The two of them set out to investigate. As evening fell, the two of them arrived at an abandoned building. Isaac caught the scent of blood, and Allison's heart sank. They had guessed correctly. She had already steeled herself for a confrontation with her father. The menacing face of the Dark Druid appeared. Allison rushed forward, prepared to take down her own father for the greater good. To her shock, she disrupted Chris's carefully planned capture operation. It turned out to be a misunderstanding, and unfortunately, the Dark Druid escaped. Stiles, upon learning what happened, informed them that the policewoman was once a teacher. Therefore, the target wasn't the protectors, but the scholars. Coincidentally, all the teachers were attending a music memorial that night. At the hospital, Stiles tried to convince his father at the hospital. The sheriff was still resistant to changing his mind. The conversation ended on a sour note. Before the music memorial began, Danny enjoyed encouragement from his boyfriend, Ethan, their affection palpable. Scott and Lydia arrived as well. Lydia finally embraced her supernatural abilities, which she had always resisted. She realized that accepting her gift could potentially save many lives. Derek stayed by his sister's bedside. Their relationship hadn't always been good, but he promised never to leave her again, valuing family above all else. The sheriff began to take his son's words seriously. He asked Melissa for records of animal attacks in the town over the past decade. Allison and her friends also arrived at the memorial. Chris sensed an impending storm. The music began, solemn and poignant. Lydia received a text from the straight twin, inviting her to meet in the classroom. The straight twin, noticing her glance, nodded in acknowledgement. Although annoyed, Lydia went to the meeting, unaware it was a trap. Melissa recalled an incident from over a decade ago. A girl the sheriff had saved was in critical condition, and during her rescue, hundreds of birds crashed into the hospital walls, seemingly committing mass suicide. The sheriff, realizing they might have been making a sacrifice, finally believed Stiles. Meanwhile, Lydia reached the classroom, where a haunting battle hymn played in her ears. To her shock, teacher Jennifer was the Dark Druid. At the memorial, the music suddenly shifted from mournful to fiercely passionate. Each performer seemed to channel their anger, the tune instilling unease in everyone. Lydia awoke to Jennifer's fervent declaration that the term sacrifice was misunderstood. It was a sacred ritual, a necessary evil. Jennifer moved to strangle Lydia, who wasn't part of the sacrifice but simply knew too much. In a life-or-death moment, Lydia's potential was unleashed. Her hysterical scream was deafening, freezing Jennifer in place. At the same time, Scott, Isaac, the twins, and Derek all clutched their heads in pain. Only werewolves could hear Lydia's scream. Jennifer was astonished at Lydia's identity. She was a banshee, or more fittingly, a wailing banshee. This gave Jennifer yet another reason to want her dead. At the concert, a piano string suddenly snapped, and the pianist collapsed, becoming the third scholar sacrificed. Allison found mistletoe in the teacher's vomit. Just as Jennifer was about to strike the final blow, the sheriff arrived, followed by Scott, who revealed his werewolf form to the sheriff. Despite his dramatic entrance, he was quickly overpowered by Jennifer and left bleeding. Stiles arrived, but was held back, as Scott wanted to protect him, knowing all the werewolves were being bested. The sheriff shot Jennifer in the leg, but her wound healed instantly. The 5 sacrifices granted Jennifer various powers. She kissed the sheriff, both wide-eyed in shock, as Jennifer's scarred, pale face was revealed. Jennifer was the Dark Druid, sacrificing 3 scholars and kidnapping the town's sheriff. Tonight promised to be anything but peaceful. Due to a thunderstorm approaching, patients were being moved from the hospital. Melissa, learning that only Cora remained, went to check on her and ran into an old acquaintance, Peter. Suddenly, Cora vomited black blood mixed with white mistletoe, suggesting that it's Jennifer's doing. Meanwhile, Jennifer arrived at Derek's place, trying to preemptively discredit Scott and his friends, not knowing they had already told Derek the truth. Jennifer continued to deny her crimes and demanded proof. Scott revealed a vial of mistletoe powder, exposing Jennifer's true form briefly. Derek, shocked and furious to realize he had been intimate with a monster, grabbed Jennifer, ready to kill her. But Jennifer had one last card. Cora's life was in her hands. She demanded Derek call Peter. Upon learning of Cora's poisoning, Derek reluctantly stopped. Jennifer taunted that they all needed her, forcing the 3 men to take her to the hospital. On the way, Jennifer tried to manipulate Derek, claiming she chose to stay out of love. Derek coldly questioned why she had a backup plan involving Cora. Jennifer hinted at a deep connection from years past, but Derek silenced her. Stiles sensed something was off, feeling that Jennifer seemed unfazed, as if everything was going according to her plan. Arriving at the hospital, they met Melissa, who told them an ambulance was ready in the garage for Cora. When they reached Cora's room, she was gone, leaving a trail of black blood. They heard fighting behind a door and discovered Peter being thrown out. It was the Alpha Pack causing trouble. Enraged, Derek fought the combined werewolf while Scott joined in, trying to awaken Ethan's conscience. Stiles and Peter used the chaos to rescue Cora. Jennifer slipped away into the elevator, meeting Deucalion and Kaylee on the first floor. Deucalion fired his blind cane, narrowly missing but revealing he wasn't completely blind. Kaylee rushed to stop the elevator door, but Jennifer, her eyes glowing gold, struck with formidable power, forcing Kaylee back. As Scott and others evaded the Alpha Pack, Stiles, wielding a baseball bat, believed he could fight back. Hiding behind a door, he ambushed the twins, but the bat shattered against their unyielding bodies. The twins roared like twin gooses and dismissed Stiles' shitty actions. Meanwhile, Isaac, having learned about the hospital evacuation, couldn't trust Peter and decided to check on Cora himself. The hunter and his daughter joined him. When Melissa reached the elevator, she had just taken down the blind cane when a large hand grabbed it, showing that Deucalion and his companion had not pursued Jennifer, but were waiting for Melissa. The twins had temporarily separated, as they weren't in sync during the fight. Ethan had hesitated, and his twin brother scolded him for it. Scott and his group hid in a storage room. Cora's condition was worsening, and Jennifer had escaped. Just when they were at a loss, Jennifer appeared, proposing a deal. If they escorted her out safely, she would heal Cora and release Stiles' father. Derek was ready to attack for her harsh conditions. Stiles tried to persuade Jennifer to heal Cora first as a show of good faith, but Jennifer stood her ground. Peter lost his temper and suggested torturing her instead. At that moment, Melissa's voice came over the intercom. Under Deucalion's coercion, she announced that if they took Jennifer to the ER, they could leave safely. Jennifer reassured everyone that Deucalion wouldn't harm Melissa because he wanted to form an alpha pack and recruit a true alpha. Peter, knowledgeable about werewolf lore, knew that only Scott fit the true alpha profile. Scott made a quick decision to get Jennifer out safely before rescuing his mother. They needed to get to the garage, but had to get past the twins. Scott volunteered to hold them off, while Derek kept an eye on Jennifer, and Peter assisted him. As they searched for weapons, Peter mocked Stiles' broken baseball bat. Scott found a vial of adrenaline. Derek warned that using it on the twins would only make them stronger. Peter was curious to see how strong he could become. He used the adrenaline, feeling a brief surge of energy. Scott and Peter confronted the twins, covering Derek and the others as they headed to the garage. The ambulance was still there, but the driver had been killed. Kaylee was waiting. Stiles and Cora hid in the car, while Derek and Jennifer fled back into the hospital, escaping Kaylee by using the elevator. Unexpectedly, the power went out, trapping them inside. On the roof, Deucalion cut the power but released Melissa, as Jennifer had promised. He wouldn't harm her because he wanted to recruit her son, Scott. In the ambulance, Stiles was relieved they hadn't been caught, but then realized Cora had stopped breathing. He performed CPR, causing Cora to breathe again, and Stiles felt a mix of relief and slight disappointment, wishing for a conscious kiss next time. As the adrenaline wore off, Peter became weak again. Scott took him to the garage and returned to save Derek, but the twins blocked his way. Melissa arrived in time, using a defibrillator to shock the twins. Scott couldn't believe it. His mother looked like a Valkyrie. In the elevator, Jennifer tried to win Derek back, saying that the sacrifices were real, but their feelings were real too. They had a connection from years ago, but Derek remained expressionless. Deucalion and Kaylee discussed Jennifer's past. Jennifer had once been Kaylee's real estate agent. To join the Alpha Pack, one had to kill their own pack. Ennis, Kaylee, and the twins not only destroyed their packs, but also killed their pack's druids. Jennifer's scarred face was Kaylee's doing. Kaylee claimed she thought Jennifer was dead, but admitted hearing her faint heartbeat. Jennifer had crawled to the sacred tree, which had been cut down, nearly losing its power. But fate intervened, and the ashes reignited as someone infused them with energy. In the flashback, Derek's first love, Paige, failed to transform into a werewolf and died in the tree stump, killed by Derek. Her blood soaked the roots of the sacred tree, effectively making her a virgin sacrifice and empowering the Nemeton. Jennifer, relying on this power, survived. This is why Jennifer always claimed that she and Derek had a connection going back over a decade. One flower withered, another bloomed. Paige's life flowed through Jennifer, the Nemeton's power keeping her alive until the sheriff could rescue her. Melissa mentioned previously that during the rescue of a girl, hundreds of crows crashed into the hospital to sacrifice themselves for Jennifer. The sheriff was the first to discover Jennifer's identity because he had once saved her. Allison and her group arrived just in time to join Scott and his mother, ready to launch a counterattack. To gain Derek's trust, Jennifer spoke about mistletoe and Norse mythology. Her point was that her human sacrifices were meant to acquire the 5 powers needed to avenge herself on the Alpha Pack. Derek dismissed her plan as futile. Jennifer retorted him, asking what would happen to werewolves during an eclipse, the same question mentioned by Boyd before he died. Derek knew the answer but had not voiced it. During the eclipse, werewolves would lose all their powers. The immediate task was to restore power to free Derek and Jennifer from the elevator. The group split up. Allison and her father distracted the twins and Kaylee so Isaac could move Stiles and the others. Melissa headed to the roof to restore power while Scott went to rescue Derek. Once the elevator was powered, Derek let his guard down and was attacked from behind by Jennifer. As Stiles left, he noticed that the medical form had a section for parents or guardians. Realizing that guardian also meant protectors, he understood why Jennifer had kidnapped his father and rushed to the hospital. Scott found Derek unconscious in the elevator and ran to the roof to find Melissa. Deucalion appeared, revealing that everything had gone according to his plan. If Jennifer had been plotting to kidnap Melissa since she approached Derek, Deucalion had used her plan to his advantage, knowing that guardians referred to parents. He had intentionally let Melissa go, providing Jennifer the opportunity to kidnap her. Deucalion proposed a deal to Scott, help him defeat Jennifer, and he would help rescue Melissa and Stiles' father. Scott had no choice but to agree. Stiles arrived, realizing the dual nature of the trap set by Jennifer and Deucalion, both achieving their goals. Jennifer kidnapping Melissa and Deucalion recruiting Scott. The dark druid Jennifer kidnapped Scott's mother, forcing him to collaborate with Deucalion. Stiles returned to the elevator, slapping Derek awake. When Isaac went to assist Chris and his daughter, Peter silently slipped away, still harboring grudges. Derek arrived, and Stiles stayed at the hospital to stall the police, buying time for his friends to escape. Due to the sheriff's disappearance, the FBI agent took over the police department. Stiles tried to bluff his way through, but the agent questioned the name painted on the elevator. Someone had written Chris's name in red paint. The dying Cora was taken back to Derek's place, where the werewolves struggled to find a solution. Isaac insisted on rescuing the sheriff and Melissa first, but Derek refused to leave his injured sister. Enraged, Isaac vowed to save them himself and stormed out. Peter was never one to be bound by morality. To placate his nephew, he smeared Isaac's name, claiming he was only looking for an excuse to leave them and join another alpha, Scott. Derek remarked that Scott wasn't an alpha yet, but Peter insisted he soon would be, a blatant display of jealousy. Meanwhile, Stiles approached the hunter duo, revealing the blood writing in the elevator. He suggested it might be a warning, indicating Chris as Jennifer's next target. Chris decided not to wait passively. With the map of sacrificial coordinates, they planned to take the initiative. As they prepared for action, Isaac arrived, willing to lend a hand. Peter, seeing Derek's determination to save his sister, shared a legend. The primal energy within an alpha not only enhances their strength and changes their eyes from gold to fiery red, but can also heal their kin at a great cost. Derek made the tough decision to ask Peter how to proceed. Peter's slight smirk hinted at his ulterior motives. Lydia, staring at the marks on her neck, felt a strange sense of survival. When her mother suggested covering them, Lydia refused. Isaac and the hunter duo went to the vault where Chris unexpectedly electrocuted Isaac and handcuffed his daughter. He then surrendered, and Jennifer appeared, satisfied with Chris's readiness to sacrifice himself, presumably to save the kidnapped sheriff and Melissa. After Chris was taken away, Allison broke down. Isaac freed her and embraced her, their bond strengthening as Allison distanced herself from Scott. Derek, ready to make the ultimate sacrifice to heal Cora, was stopped by Peter. With the full moon approaching, Derek would be vulnerable without his alpha powers. Peter's arguments about rationality only strengthened Derek's resolve. Peter revealed his suspicion that Jennifer was manipulating Derek to weaken him for the alphas. The sisters' deteriorating condition left Derek torn. Learning that Chris had also been captured, Stiles trembled, realizing that all three guardians were now in Jennifer's grasp. At the Nemeton, Chris tried to execute a prearranged escape plan, only to learn from the sheriff and Melissa that Jennifer had already confiscated the hidden knives. Undeterred, Chris hinted at other concealed tools, but Jennifer appeared, revealing she had taken everything, including a taser hidden in his jacket. Chris felt hopeless. Stiles, in a state of panic, struggled to breathe. Lydia, unable to calm him, kissed him using her juicy tongue, snapping him out of his terror. Reflecting on their predicament, Stiles realized they needed Morel's help. At her office, they found a waiting patient but no Morel. Stiles, flipping through Morel's files, noticed Lydia's repeated drawings of identical trees, which he recognized as Nemeton, the sacred tree stump. He deduced that the Guardians were held there. As they prepared to inform the others, the FBI agent intercepted Stiles. Lydia, rushing to Derek's place, was greeted by her nightmare, Peter. Lydia shared her findings with Derek and Peter, but they revealed that Derek's mother had erased their memories of the Nemeton to protect them from its painful history. Meanwhile, Morel was on the run from the Alpha Pack. Scott, following Deucalion, learned that Jennifer's supposed quest for revenge involved the mass animal suicides and the deaths of many innocents. Morel, realizing she couldn't outrun the Alphas, created a protective circle of Rowan powder. The twins and Kaylee, unable to breach the barrier, found themselves at an impasse. Deucalion and Scott arrived just in time. Morel's actions had been exposed. It turns out the chicken girl who saved Isaac at the beginning was actually working for her. For years, Morel had aligned herself with demons to prevent them from harming innocents. She warned Scott to stay away from Deucalion, even revealing that Deucalion had killed his own kind. The twins and Kaylee exchanged questioning glances but dared not challenge Deucalion's authority. Calmly, Deucalion accused Morel of trying to sow discord before her demise, then shot his blind cane at her. Morel was hit in the shoulder and stumbled out of the protective circle. Deucalion panicked, but Scott stepped in, saving Morel's life. She then revealed that the three captives were being held in the Nemeton. In the Nematon, the three captives shared stories. The sheriff, now aware of the supernatural, regretted his past decisions. 8 years ago, while his wife was terminally ill in the hospital, he was involved in a car accident rescue. A woman trapped under the car had grabbed his hand with incredible strength, urging him to go to his wife. He ignored her warning, only to find his wife had died by the time he reached the hospital. He regretted not believing the woman, whose abilities were reminiscent of Lydia's. This incident seemed to be another piece of the puzzle. The vet devised a risky plan to locate Nematon, but needed Scott's help. The problem was that even the druids, Morel and the vet, didn't know its exact location. Later, they found Scott met in the forest. When Stiles asked about his allegiance, Scott admitted needing the Alpha Pack's power to stop Jennifer, a disappointing revelation for Stiles. The vet suggested finding Nematon, explaining the dangerous plan to use sacrifices. Scott, Stiles, and Allison would sacrifice themselves for their parents. The vet warned that while death wasn't the worst outcome, Nematon, long deprived of energy, might absorb their sacrifice, turning it into a beacon for supernatural beings. If they survived, Nematon would haunt them forever, foreshadowing future disasters. Meanwhile, Chris managed to retrieve a hidden ultrasonic emitter from his smelly pants, designed to attract werewolves within a limited range. Derek, seeing his sister's suffering, decided to transfer his alpha power to heal her. The vet suggested the three teenagers would undergo a near-death experience to find Nematon. He then prepared 3 ice baths for the sacrifices through 3 keepsakes: the sheriff's badge, a silver bullet Chris had forged, and a watch given to Melissa by Scott's father. The others were tasked with drowning the 3 teenagers and then reviving them, requiring close bonds between the pairs. Lydia volunteered to partner with Isaac. However, the vet paired Lydia with Stiles, leaving Scott with the vet, and Allison with Isaac, creating a tense atmosphere. Scott realized Isaac had quietly encroached on his territory, causing further strain. As the 3 submerged in the ice baths, Stiles told Scott his father was back. This shocked Scott to his core. Meanwhile, a tall man, teary-eyed and filled with mixed emotions, sat alone in a room. The FBI agent was revealed to be Scott's father. The scene shifts to 3 teenagers woke up in ice baths in an empty, pristine world. They had actually died, their souls leaving their bodies and arriving in this world to find the druid's Nematon. Before them lay an ancient tree stump. Placing their hands on it, they each became observers, transported back to the pivotal night. On that night, Scott was not yet a werewolf. During an adventure in the woods, he was bitten by Peter, changing his life forever. As a spirit, Scott realized the spot where he was bitten was the druid's Nematon. That same night, Stiles, taken away by his sheriff father, missed his chance to become a werewolf. Observing this, Stiles also identified the Nematon. Allison, driving through the forest that night, almost hit the escaping Scott. Their fates had crossed earlier than they realized. Allison, determined to check on the boy, found Scott's lost inhaler, but her mother threw it away. As an observer, Allison saw she had been near the Nematon. The 3 awoke simultaneously, declaring they had found the Nematon's location. They had all been near it before. The vet looked seriously, saying they had been in the tubs for 16 hours and the full moon was in 4 hours. Derek, having exhausted his power to save his sister, was now a beta. With the full moon approaching, how would he face the vengeful Alpha Pack? Knowing the Nematon's location, Scott wanted to seek Deucalion's help, but Stiles opposed it, not wanting to make a deal with the devil. Surprisingly, the vet supported Scott's plan. At that moment, Ethan arrived, asking specifically for Lydia, saying only she could save Derek. Hours passed with no rescue in sight, and the 3 parents grew desperate. Suddenly, they heard a whistling sound and falling debris. A storm was coming. To avert Derek's crisis, only Lydia was needed. She and Ethan went to warn Derek. Initially stubborn, Derek wanted to confront Kaylee, but urged by Peter, he decided to flee, calling it a tactical retreat. Peter stayed behind, knowing chaos was his element. Kaylee and the straight twin arrived, finding only Ethan and Lydia. With his brother and girlfriend on the opposite side, the straight twin had no choice but to betray Kaylee, just as Ethan had planned. Scott, Stiles, and Allison decided to gather their parents' scents before searching for the Nematon. At Allison's house, they were met by an unexpected visitor, the FBI agent who is Scott's father. After years apart, father and son were reunited, though Scott showed no warmth, resenting his father's abandonment. The father commented on the town's chaos, promising to bring order. He noted that several crime scenes involved the teenagers and demanded they explain. Scott noticed flashbang grenades on the table, designed to subdue werewolves. As the twins and Kaylee faced off, Jennifer suddenly appeared. She aimed to recruit Derek and settle scores with Kaylee. The arrogant alpha werewolves were defeated within a few rounds. Jennifer interrupted the twins' merging process, which they had thought would make them stronger. Instead, it was revealed that each twin was only half a werewolf, and together they formed a single alpha. Kaylee rose again, but Jennifer's hatred for her was unmatched. Summoning her power, shards of glass floated around her, and the sky above darkened with storm clouds. She had gained control over the Earth's currents through her sacrifices, and tonight's storm was her doing. Seeking revenge, she attacked Kaylee, leading to her downfall. Jennifer easily snapped the neck of the merged twins, showing her overwhelming power. She spared Lydia, using her true form to scare her into screaming. Lydia's banshee scream could be heard by werewolves miles away. Derek, hearing it, turned back to rescue her. Stiles ventured alone into the forest, getting closer to the Nemeton as the storm intensified. Unable to see, his jeep swayed and eventually crashed into a tree. Meanwhile, the FBI agent confronted Allison about her firearms, but she distracted him with a smoke grenade, allowing them to escape. With Stiles out of contact, Scott and his companions rushed to the forest where Deucalion awaited them. Scott planned to team up with Deucalion against Jennifer and instructed the other two to rescue the captives. Derek and his sister returned to their place, stunned by Jennifer's display of power. As Peter predicted, Jennifer had orchestrated Cora's poisoning to lure Derek into her plans. She wanted Derek to help her fight the demon wolf, Deucalion, promising to release the sheriff and the others if he agreed. Derek agreed, and as they left, they found the twins still alive and rushed them to the vet for treatment. Jennifer kept checking the time, anticipating the lunar eclipse. She received a challenge from Scott and headed to meet him. In the forest, Isaac heard the ultrasonic emitter and found the Nemeton's entrance. However, the storm was collapsing the Nemeton, and as they freed the captives, the entrance ladder broke, trapping them underground. Isaac used his werewolf strength to hold up the collapsing soil. At the distillery, Scott and Deucalion awaited Jennifer. As she arrived, Derek emerged from behind, having allied with her. Scott felt betrayed, seeing Derek as aiding the enemy, but Derek believed he was doing the right thing to save their parents. Their shared goal led to a confrontation. Deucalion accused Jennifer of sacrificing 9 innocent lives, revealing his true alpha form. He was covered in thick black fur and exuded a terrifying presence, causing Jennifer to tremble and wet her pants. Derek attacked first, but Deucalion overpowered him without using his full strength. Jennifer concentrated all her power into an attack, but couldn't harm Deucalion. He had reached the pinnacle of werewolf strength, embodying the title of Demon Wolf. Deucalion dominated both Jennifer and Derek, lifting Jennifer and urging Scott to deliver the final blow. Scott hesitated, knowing that becoming a killer would prevent him from being a true alpha. Enraged, Deucalion used an alpha roar to force Scott to transform. Jennifer urged Scott not to be turned into the next Demon Wolf. Scott refused to kill, believing his mother and the others were still alive. Deucalion grabbed Scott, intending to force him into the act, but Scott pulled out 2 flashbang grenades. The blinding light temporarily disabled Deucalion. As the lunar eclipse began, all 3 werewolves lost their powers. This was Jennifer's moment of triumph. The eclipse also weakened Isaac, and as he struggled, Stiles arrived, using an aluminum bat to hold up the collapsing soil. Deucalion, Scott, and Derek watched helplessly as Jennifer emerged from the mist, now unstoppable. In an instant, she sent Scott flying like a Barbie toy and brutally beat Deucalion. Jennifer, now with absolute power, healed Deucalion's eyes, forcing him to see his past atrocities before she planned to kill him. When Jennifer moved to deliver the final blow, she suddenly weakened. Derek caught her, thinking she had exhausted her power-healing Deucalion. Jennifer asked Derek to finish the job, but he refused, knowing right from wrong. This was likely Jennifer's test, and seeing Derek's integrity, she regained her strength. Despite Derek's diminished power, his resilience helped him endure the fight until the eclipse ended. As the moon reappeared, Derek's strength returned. Jennifer formed a protective circle of powder. Scott approached slowly. Jennifer taunted him, recalling his previous failure to break the druid's barrier. This time, however, his eyes changed from gold to fiery red as he pushed through the barrier, becoming a true alpha. Unprecedented and unseen before, he broke the barrier through sheer willpower. Seizing the moment, Deucalion rose and slashed Jennifer's chicken throat, ending the storm and restoring peace. The twins were also saved by the vet. Scott believed Deucalion was not inherently evil, but had been driven to extremity by Gerard's manipulation. Healing his eyes had allowed Deucalion to let go of his obsessions. Allison expressed her desire to become a better hunter, suggesting a new motto for their family. Derek decided to take his sister and leave, seeking a life away from the conflicts. Scott found himself back where he started, with his loyal friend Stiles by his side. Meanwhile, Jennifer, barely alive, crawled to the Nemeton, begging for one more chance at life. Just as she reached out, a clawed hand stopped her. It was Peter. He finished her chicken life off for good. The storm stirred by the dark druid had subsided, but more formidable enemies were on the horizon. The scene shifts to Stiles' dreams, where he found himself in his school's locker room, walking through a silent hallway. He noticed a classroom door ajar, and inside, the room was a mess with the ancient sacred tree standing before him. Anxiously, Stiles reached out to touch it, but vines ensnared him, jolting him awake. He heard Lydia's voice and realized he was sharing a bed with her, indicating that a nightmare turned into a wet dream. Fully aware, Stiles asked Lydia what she was doing there. Suddenly, the door creaked open. Stiles, ignoring Lydia's warnings, got up to investigate. Opening the door, he found himself in the forest, standing before the sacred tree again. This was the third level of his dream. Trying to truly wake up, Stiles hit his head. The nightmare dissolved, leaving him in a daze. Stiles immediately found Scott and recounted his layered dreams. They suspected it was a mental trauma from their previous near-death experience, with the Nemeton haunting their minds. Stiles confessed his biggest fear, not knowing what was real. Suddenly, he woke up again. It had been the fourth level of his dream. Though Scott defeated Jennifer and pacified Deucalion, the price of their near-death experience was living under the Nemeton's shadow forever. The three teenagers seemed to resume normal lives, but Scott experienced hallucinations, seeing his shadow in werewolf form. Allison's nightmares featured her deceased aunt Kate, the madwoman from the first season. One moment, Allison was on her way to school. The next, she was in the morgue with Kate crawling towards her, causing her to wake up at school. Isaac, growing closer to Allison, felt guilty for betraying Scott, who had always been kind to him, despite Allison and Scott's breakup. A fight broke out between Scott and Isaac, with Scott knocking him out. Melissa intervened, stopping the fight. At school, Scott was alarmed to see his shadow change into a werewolf form, resembling Peter's early transformation. Panicked, he distanced himself from the crowd, snapping out of it only after Stiles yelled at him. Allison and Lydia also noticed something was wrong with themselves. At the police station, the sheriff reviewed cases linked to the supernatural. He recalled a full-moon car crash where a mother and two daughters died, their bodies covered in bites and claw marks, but one daughter's body was missing. This case now seemed tied to werewolves. A new teacher arrived at school, bringing his daughter, Kira. Shy after being introduced by her father, Kira caught Scott's eye, and it was clear they were smitten. Isaac's earlier fight seemed pointless now. Scott felt no shame over his feelings. Spring fever gripped Scott again, and his shadow shifted once more. Allison, struggling with her nightmares, couldn't keep her hands steady while shooting, haunted by visions of her aunt's bloody demise. Isaac stayed by her side, silently supporting her. They made it through the day on edge. In his locker, Stiles found that the combination had turned into druidic symbols, further blurring the line between dream and reality. Scott overheard Kira and her father's conversation, only to be caught by Kira, who was surprisingly perceptive. Losing control, Scott's eyes turned red, and he and Kira rushed to an empty classroom. He clawed his hand to regain control through pain. Despite appearing fine, Stiles was also struggling. He could no longer read, with words on posters, paintings, and blackboards jumbled and nonsensical. In the forest, Lydia helped Allison practice archery. During the session, Allison fell into another hallucination, seeing her aunt charging at her. She almost shot Lydia, but Isaac intervened just in time. Isaac told Scott about the incident, but Scott just wondered why he was following Allison, resulting in Isaac getting punched again. Stiles visited his sheriff father and learned that he was investigating an 8-year-old cold case involving a missing girl named Malia, whose body was never found. This case had haunted the sheriff, but knowing about werewolves now shed new light on the mystery. The next day in class, Stiles noticed an eerie silence. Everyone looked dazed, and the teacher kept repeating a series of sign language gestures. Confused, Stiles stood to leave, but suddenly everyone in the class turned to him, mimicking the gestures faster and faster as if warning him of imminent danger. Stiles broke into a sweat until he realized the sound was a whistle and the teacher was trying to wake him. Scott asked if he was okay, seeing Stiles's notebook filled with the word "wake up," which sent chills down his spine. During lunch, the group discussed how to distinguish reality from dreams, fearing exhaustion and mistakes. Kira approached, having overheard their conversation, and suggested they were experiencing a transitional state between life and death. Kira explained that it involved progressive states of hallucinations leading ultimately to death. Seeking the vet's help, Scott and Stiles described the nightmares. The vet asked Stiles to demonstrate the sign language, which translated to, "When is a door not a door?" The vet explained this was a subconscious warning. When their souls left their bodies, they entered a hyperconscious state, opening a mental door that must be closed immediately. After leaving the pet clinic, the sheriff approached Scott, asking for his help in locating Malia's body. The next day, they visited Malia's father. While the sheriff distracted him, Scott and Stiles searched for Malia's belongings, but found only the overwhelming scent of dogs. With no clues, they took a photo of Malia. Learning his wife and daughter were murdered reopened old wounds for Malia's father, who then asked them to get lost with their smelly butts. Curious, Scott asked why the sheriff was so focused on this case. Stiles revealed it was his father's first case, and he wanted closure before his possible termination. Scott's father planned to fire the sheriff, leading to a heated argument between father and son, where Scott almost lost control and attacked his father, only to be stopped by his mother. The father noticed something unusual about his son. Late at night, unable to sleep, Stiles was joined by Scott, and they decided to continue searching for Malia's body. Meanwhile, Allison dreamt of an affair with Isaac, revealing her subconscious feelings. Her wet dream turned into a nightmare with her Aunt Kate appearing, urging her to become a werewolf. Allison woke up in terror. Meanwhile, Scott and Stiles found the car crash site in the forest. The claw marks on the car wreckage were clearly made by a werewolf. Stiles discovered a doll with a built-in voice feature that startled them both, suggesting it had been placed there recently. They heard a low growl and saw a wild wolf. Scott chased after it, but the wolf was incredibly fast. Despite not being transformed, Scott managed to take a shortcut across a ravine and intercept the wolf. They faced each other at close range. Scott revealed his alpha red eyes, and the wild wolf immediately calmed, its eyes turning an icy blue. Shocked, Scott hesitantly asked if it was Malia, but the wolf fled for its wolf life, confirming it was a shape-shifting werewolf. In a torture chamber filled with instruments, Derek's phone received 2 texts from Scott. Little did Scott know, Peter and Derek were being tortured. It's unclear how they ended up in such a dire situation so quickly.